Most students try to memorize this, but I'm going to help you understand it instead. There's three main parts to a nucleotide. If we don't show the location of a bond, we assume it's a carbon. The main difference with RNA is it has the same bases, except we replace with uracil. That's today on High Peak Education. So here's the basic idea of DNA. We can see it looks like this. It's got this double helix structure. So that's one side of the DNA, and then over here is the other side of the DNA. And it turns out it's made up of two strands of polynucleotides. Now remember, in science, hopefully you've heard this before, poly means many. Just like in math, we say polynomial, many terms. Polynucleotides, many nucleotides. Now, what is a nucleotide? A nucleotide is going to be different than other things you may have heard of in biology. So if you go to the gym and you want to get like your body in good shape, you need to understand in terms of nutrition the three main macronutrients. Fats, carbs, and proteins, right? Every dietitian you ever work with always talks about those three, right? What I'm trying to say is that a nucleotide is most closely related to proteins. In some sense, you've heard people say before, proteins are the building blocks of life. And even more than that, proteins are made up of amino
acids.
And it turns out that's why we need to eat protein, and that's why our muscles are made up of protein. But the idea is that the stuff of that is these nucleotides. So, by the way, here's what I'm trying to say. A nucleotide is not a fat or a carbohydrate. Okay, it's more so related to protein. There's three main parts to a nucleotide: a phosphate group, a pentose sugar, and a nitrogenous base. At least in terms of this slide, they're pictured as the yellow circle, pentagon in green, and then the hexagon in orange. Now, here's the interesting thing. If you've heard of DNA, do you know what DNA is short for?
I don't know the first word, but it's like something acid.
Yeah, so it's going to be deoxyribonucleic acid. The reason I bring that up at this point is because we're also going to not just talk about DNA a little bit today. We're going to talk about its kind of thing that it's often mentioned with. It's not DNA, but RNA. Have you heard of this? So it's less famous. So DNA is the stuff of life, but RNA is part of what helps us to send messages out. Remember I said DNA is like a language, and also transcribe and actually make these copies. DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid, whereas RNA is just ribonucleic acid. So basically, what's this deoxy part? Well, deoxy just means when we're looking at DNA, it does not have an extra OH, so that's a hydroxyl group. Now, OH, hydroxide is a very common structure in chemistry, so there's no hydroxyl group in DNA. But as we're going to see, RNA has the hydroxyl group, the nitrogenous base, pentose sugar, and then the phosphate group. Now, here's the interesting thing. See this backbone right here to the DNA molecule? That's actually going to be made of basically just these, just the phosphates and pentose. Now, listen to me carefully. The phosphates and the pentose are made of covalent bonds. Have you heard of covalent bonds in chemistry before? Co meaning shared, valent meaning valence electrons. So valence electrons are on the outside of bonds. These are very strong bonds. Hence, when we have the DNA double helix, the backbone of the double helix is extremely strong because the phosphorus and the sugar are strongly bonded together. But watch this. The bridge in the middle between the two sides of the double helix are the nitrogen bases. So we're going to get into what those four nitrogen bases are that are the stuff of life. And it turns out those nitrogen bases are very weakly bonded to each other. Those are actually what we call hydrogen bonds. So we're going to get to that soon. But here's the deal. I want you to think of backbone here as very strong. And I want you to think of all this stuff here as just these. Just the phosphorus and the and the pentose. By the way, one other thing I should mention. Remember how I said DNA is ribonucleic acid? Let's think about breaking this down. Ribo is like ribosomes, which if you recall from cell biology, that's one of the organelles inside of a cell. Also, it's nucleic acid. And so when I say nucleic acid, DNA is going to be in the nucleus of the cell. And remember we said in prophase, part of mitosis, that's why the nucleus has to go away. It's because we need to get the DNA out of the nucleus. We need to move it to the metaphase plate and then pull it apart to divide cells. So part of the reason it's called nucleic is because nucleic sounds like nucleus. Let's look in a little more detail in terms of what do these nucleotides look like and what does this chain look like. So here's the sugar-phosphate backbone. So think of this part right here as, again, this backbone part of the DNA, right? So there's the sugar-phosphate backbone, which again is made up of phosphorus. And then one of the things we know is that most organic compounds are made up of a ton of carbon. So hopefully you're aware that if we don't show the location of a bond, we assume it's a carbon. So like for instance, see this sugar right here as an example? You assume this is a carbon right there. Carbon is so ubiquitous. In other words, we are carbon-based life forms. But the reason I also know this is a carbon right here is because there's 1, 2, 3, 4 bonds. Do you see that? Carbon has 4 bonds, right? It has like 4 valence electrons, so it's looking for 4 more. Now, the reason I bring that to your attention is because every time we write down chemicals today, assume that we're writing down the chemicals that are non-carbon. Like P here would be phosphorus, O would be oxygen, CH is carbon with hydrogens there, that's a special part. And then we've got some hydrogen bonding going here, that's what makes it a sugar. And then notice that we have these nitrogenous bases. There are 4 nitrogenous bases. This is one little fact that you should memorize, just because they are so ubiquitous in DNA and the stuff of life that we need to know them. They are known as thymine, adenine, cytosine, guanine, TACG. And by the way, they happen so much we almost always abbreviate them by their capital first letter. So TACG, thymine, adenine, cytosine, guanine. Okay? Notice that there's 4 different ones, and suppose this person had like a very long strand of DNA we're looking at, and thymine, adenine, cytosine, guanine happen to be, on this particular part of the code. Adenine always binds to thymine. What that means is, if adenine is sitting here, across the bridge of, remember there's that double helix, right? So across the bridge of the double helix will be a T. If thymine is sitting here, across the bridge will be an adenine. And then likewise, guanine is always going to bond to cytosine. Since guanine is always going to bond to cytosine, that means if I have a cytosine here, I have a guanine. And if I have a guanine here, I'd have a cytosine across the bridge. Here's what's interesting. What we find is not all of these occur in equal numbers. So in other words, you don't necessarily have 50% adenine thymine bridges and 50% guanine cytosine. You may have more than the other. But here's what's interesting. If 10% are adenine, then 10% would be thymine. But what that means is 40% would be guanine and 40% would be cytosine. Now think about how I just came up with that. Because if I make a measurement in your body and you've got 10% adenine, then another 10% must be thymine. That covers 20%. Then the remaining 80% must be the other 2, guanine and cytosine. But each has to be half of what remains. So if 80% is left, you have to have 40% guanine, 40% cytosine. So what's interesting is that not only are there only 4 nitrogenous bases, if you know the percentage of one of them, you actually know the percentage of all 4. Because as soon as you know one, you know its dancing partner is exactly the same percentage. And then you add those up, subtract for 100%, you have what's left over and cut it in half. When DNA was first discovered, it was believed that it was too simple. Like, it was believed that like only 4 nitrogenous bases, people used to doubt that. They used to think like, oh, that's too simple. Life is so complex. Well, interestingly enough, it has been proven that, yeah, it's just these 4. All right, let's take it a little further. If adenine bonds with thymine, adenine is what's called a purine, and a thymine is what's called a pyrimidine. And then the other pyrimidine would be cytosine, and the other purine would be guanine. So even though these 2 bond, they're actually different structures. So you see like each is structured differently. Hey, thanks for checking out High Peak Education. Do you need some one-on-one guidance? Go to our Calendly link and book a grade boost game plan. Or if you're studying for a standardized test, for a score soar game plan. At highpeakeducation.com, you can click book now or see our Calendly page. Okay, let's get back to today's video. Now let's get into a little bit of the difference between DNA and RNA. DNA is on the left, RNA is on the right. DNA has this phosphate, it has a deoxyribose sugar, whereas RNA has a ribose sugar. They both have a phosphorus, that yellow circle, but RNA has the ribose sugar. RNA has this extra hydroxyl group. So that's really what makes it different. Now, up here, this base part, this base would be that nitrogenous base. Remember, DNA has the 4 nitrogenous bases, which you should memorize. Thymine, adenine, cytosine, guanine. RNA has the same 4 bases, but except one of them's different. So it actually has 3 of the 4 that DNA has, but RNA also has what's called uracil, capital U. The main difference with RNA is it has the same bases, except we replace with uracil. So I already mentioned this briefly. RNA is ribonucleic acid. It's a single-stranded nucleic acid with adenine, uracil. So again, the T, the thymine, is gone. A, U, G, and C. Adenine pairs with uracil and guanine pairs with cytosine. So the thymine is gone. RNA is kind of unique. Some biologists think that RNA, evolutionarily speaking, preceded DNA because RNA is simpler. RNA is just one backbone, whereas DNA has the double helix. So RNA is simpler. There's a couple different kinds of RNA you should be aware of. mRNA, rRNA, and then tRNA. So mRNA is messenger RNA, rRNA is ribosomal RNA, and then tRNA is transfer RNA. So messenger RNA carries genetic information to the ribosomes, because if we're going to get messages out of the nucleus, we have to send something out. That's messenger RNA. Ribosomal RNA, just like it sounds, it's in the ribosomes. So then transfer RNA transfers amino acids to the ribosomes where the protein product is synthesized. So I kind of alluded to proteins earlier a little bit. So we have to understand RNA better to understand like amino acids and proteins. So here's what RNA actually looks like. So it's still got a backbone, but it's only got one backbone, unlike DNA, right? Notice it's got GUAC, guac. Hey, that actually works out. I never realized that. Guac like guacamole. So guanine, uracil, adenine, cytosine. And it turns out that, again, each of those nitrogenous bases are going to link up to the sugar molecule. Remember, the sugar molecule is going to be a ribose sugar because in DNA, it was a deoxyribose sugar. Remember, DNA is missing that extra hydroxyl group, whereas RNA has the hydroxyl group. So there's some slight differences. Sometimes it's hard to remember A bonds to T and G bonds to C. So let me give you another little device. If guanine is bonding to cytosine, C and G, cars go in the garage, C goes with G. Whereas thymine always goes with adenine, so apples go on trees, A and T. So cars, garage, apples and trees. Guanine and cytosine, adenine, and thymine. The way I want you to remember RNA is that cars are still in the garage, but an apple is under the tree. So A goes with U. Again, I don't know if it helps you, but it helps my brain.